The note was tucked inside the back cover of his battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, the one he read to our daughter Penny every night when she was 9, her small fingers tracing the embossed letters of the title. It was written in Martin's steady architect's hand, all caps, the ink pressed so hard it had embossed the cheap paper. That note is the reason I now live in a 2-bedroom condo in a no-seniors community outside Phoenix, renting the spare room to nursing students, and teaching a course called Financial Defibrillation with Penny's mugshot plastered on page 1 of the syllabus, right under the words, "Red Flags of Family Fraud." This is the story of how a 53-year-old nurse anesthetist, a woman who spent 3 decades keeping other people alive, learned to surgically excise her own daughter from her life and reclaim a $410,000 future that was nearly stolen out from under her. My name is Elaine Vance. I worked 32 years in a Level 1 trauma center in Cleveland, first as an ICU nurse, then as a certified registered nurse anesthetist. I've calculated propofol drip rates in my sleep, recognized malignant hyperthermia before the monitor even pinged, and held a man's carotid artery closed with my bare fingers while the surgeon scrubbed in. That last skill, staying calm while someone's life leaks through your fingers, would prove more useful than I ever imagined. Martin, my husband, was a quiet architect who built custom homes. We were one of those couples that other people called solid, and we believed it. Our daughter Penelope, Penny, was brilliant from the moment she opened her eyes, all straight A's and student council, and a single-minded drive that we mistook for passion. When she decided to become a doctor, we cheered. When the undergraduate loans stacked up and medical school added another $105,000, we signed the Parent Plus loans, drained the home equity line, and eventually I liquidated the small inheritance my own mother had left me to clear the slate completely. I did it the summer before Penny started her dermatology residency in Chicago, wiring the last $42,000 to her tuition account while she hugged me and said, "You're my whole world, Mom. I'll be your power of attorney. I'll look after everything." I believed her because she was our only child, because believing is what parents do. Martin's heart gave out on a Thursday morning in April. He was at his drafting table, sketching a pergola detail, and the pencil just rolled out of his hand. I found him when I got home from a night shift, still in my scrubs, the coffee maker beeping insistently. The paramedics worked him for 42 minutes, epinephrine, defibrillation, the whole algorithm I'd taught 100 times, and they called it at 7:41 a.m. I stood in our living room, suddenly a widow at 51, with a daughter already on a plane from O'Hare before I'd finished the first phone call. The air in the house felt wrong, heavy, charged, and I kept expecting Martin's footsteps. The funeral was scheduled for Monday. Within 24 hours of Martin's body being released to the mortuary, the vultures circled. Penny arrived with her husband Brett, a medical device salesman who smelled like a department store cologne counter and drove a leased Audi he couldn't afford. They entered my house in matching athleisure, honey blonde and gym-toned, carrying casseroles from a catering service and a binder of documents they called Mom's Transition Plan. I watched them from the kitchen doorway, still numb. Brett was on his phone in the den, whispering about probate timelines and getting her settled. Penny kept patting my arm with her manicured nails, saying, "We're here to take care of everything, Mom. You just rest. You're in no shape to handle legal stuff." The phrase "no shape" landed wrong, like a needle inserted at the incorrect angle, but grief is a powerful anesthetic and I was too exhausted to process it. The discovery happened the day after the funeral. Penny and Brett had taken over the house, sorting Martin's belongings into piles. Donate, sell, trash. I was supposed to be napping upstairs under the influence of a sedative Penny had practically pushed into my mouth, but I've been around benzodiazepines my whole career, and I fake swallowed it, tucking the tablet under my tongue until she left, then spitting it into a tissue. I crept down the back staircase, the one that led to the kitchen pantry, and stood silent in the shadow of the hallway. Penny was in Martin's study, pulling books off the shelves. She held up the old copy of Monte Cristo, its spine cracked and repaired with packing tape, and laughed. "God, Dad, and his dusty classics. This thing is infested with silverfish. Trash." She tossed it into a cardboard box destined for the curb, and the thud of the book hitting the bottom of that box felt like a physical blow to my chest. Brett said something about an estate sale company and dump everything. Then they moved on to the filing cabinet. I stood there, breath held, until they left for a meeting with the probate attorney. Then I walked to that box, lifted out the book, and sat down in Martin's reading chair, the leather one with the ottoman he never let anyone else use. I opened the front cover. Nothing. I flipped through the pages, the dog-eared chapter where Edmund Dance finds the treasure, the margins where Martin had scribbled notes about the prison escape engineering. And then on the very last blank page, in his handwriting, all uppercase blue ballpoint pen, pressed so hard it left a texture on the reverse side. Elaine, check the durable POA on file at First Midwest Trust. Penny forged IT. She drained the era. Do not trust her. Save yourself. I just found out. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I love you. M. My hand started shaking so badly I dropped the book. Martin must have uncovered something in the weeks before he died. Maybe while organizing the estate documents. Maybe when Penny visited last spring for a financial planning conversation I now realized was a reconnaissance mission. He'd always handled the legal details, and now he was dead, and our daughter had somehow drained a $340,000 IRA, and I was sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt like a crime scene. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that biological connection doesn't grant anyone a license to financially disembowel you. Now, back to the day everything changed. I didn't confront them. That decision, made in the 30 seconds after I refolded the note and tucked it into the waistband of my pants, was the single smartest thing I've ever done. I'd read enough police reports to know that families who erupted at the accusation stage gave the perpetrator time to destroy evidence. I needed to be cold, to be the professional I'd been in the operating room when a patient started bleeding out on the table. I put the book back in the box, pushed it deep under some other trash, and went upstairs to nap. When Penny and Brett came back that evening, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile, my face arranged in the slack, bewildered expression they seemed to expect. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, and I remember thinking that time had become both my enemy and my ally. The manipulation started the next morning. Brett sat me down at the breakfast table, a notepad and pen placed precisely in front of me like a surgical tray. Penny stood behind him, her hands on my shoulders, her voice dripping with fake concern. Mom, we've been talking to a really good elder care attorney here in Cleveland. He strongly recommends you sign over durable power of attorney to Penny right now today, so we can handle probate without delays. You don't want to deal with the courts. It's a nightmare. And with your blood pressure, you shouldn't be stressed. Plus, we want you to move into our place in Chicago. We have a first-floor guest suite, no stairs, we'll take care of you. We'll sell this house, consolidate everything, make your life simple. She said simple, the way you'd describe a colostomy bag, a necessary inconvenience. Brett slid a document across the table, a durable power of attorney form with all the signature lines flagged with yellow arrows. The notary section was blank, waiting. I looked at it, and I saw their strategy immediately. Get the freshly widowed, foggy-headed mother to sign over everything while she was too shattered to read the fine print. The same woman who once caught a medication error in a patient's chart from across the nurse's station because the decimal point looked wrong. I let my eyes fill with tears, not fake, because the grief was still real, and I said, I just can't, sweetheart. I can't even think about legal things right now. Can I have a few days? My head is all fog. Penny exchanged a glance with Brett, that quick, loaded look that said she's playing into it, just wait, and she withdrew the papers with a smile. Of course, Mom, take your time. We'll just help you pack a bag for Chicago in the meantime. You need to be with family. So I let them move me. I packed a single suitcase, deliberately leaving behind anything that might appear suspicious, and I got into their Audi and let them drive me 4 hours west to their townhouse in Lincoln Park. The guest suite was a converted basement space, cold and gray, with a television that only got basic cable and a bathroom that smelled like bleach. They turned off the air vent so it was stuffy, the kind of detail designed to keep me disoriented and dependent. I lay in that bed the first night, listening to the floorboards creak above me as they walked around their mortgage, and I started my real work. In nursing, we have a concept called triage. Assess, prioritize, act. I had already assessed. Now I needed to gather data, and I was going to gather it like my life depended on it, because it did. The undercover investigation began with passive observation, the sort of environmental assessment any ICU nurse does when she walks into a new patient's room. Penny's schedule was erratic. She'd leave at 7 in the morning and return at 9 at night, her phone glued to her ear half the time, talking in the clipped, coded sentences that doctors use around families. I heard her in the kitchen one afternoon while I sat in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, the television murmuring in the background. "No, the closing has to be accelerated. The financing is contingent on the liquidation, and the liquidation is happening this week. Yes, I have the wire confirmation. No, the title company doesn't need to know the source, it's all under the POA. POA, power of attorney." She was talking about my money, my retirement, as if it were a commodities trade already settled. I held the magazine steady and kept my breathing even, the same way I'd calm a patient waking up disoriented from anesthesia. Later that evening, I heard Brett in the den, his voice low and strained, arguing with someone about the escrow timeline, and we already told them it's an inheritance liquidation. I memorized the phrases. Brett was less careful. He'd leave his laptop open on the kitchen island, and from the reflection in the glass cabinet, I could see his screen. One afternoon, he was on a real estate site, scrolling through photos of a brand new condo development in Scottsdale, Arizona. The listing had a giant banner that said, "Vibrant 55-plus community." No, Sonoran Estates is exclusively for young professionals and families. Age restriction, no permanent residents over 55. I was 53. The condo was designed specifically to exclude people like me, and the price, $410,000, was almost exactly the balance of my IRA plus some of the home equity they clearly intended to liberate. They were purchasing a property I couldn't legally inhabit with the money Martin and I had spent 30 years saving. A week into my stay, I manufactured a small household accident. The garbage disposal under the kitchen sink seized up, a grinding, mechanical death rattle that sent Brett into a panic. He immediately reached for his phone to call an emergency plumber, and I said, "Oh, don't bother. I've fixed ours at home a dozen times. Let me look at it." He looked at me like I'd offered to perform brain surgery, but he handed me a hex wrench. I got down on my knees, removed the rubber splash guard, and freed the jammed blade with a few careful twists. While I was under there, my eyes swept the cabinet area the way they used to sweep a crash cart for missing equipment. Right next to the plumbing cleanout, I saw a white plastic shredder bag, the kind that holds confetti-cut documents. A corner of cardstock was sticking out, the distinctive thickness of a financial statement. I pretended to wipe my hands on a paper towel and palmed that fragment. Later, in my room, I used a pair of tweezers from my nursing bag and a piece of clear medical tape to reconstruct the torn strips, a skill I'd learned piecing together medication labels that had disintegrated in autoclave accidents. The header read, "First Midwest Trust, IRA Account Summary, Account Holder, Elaine M. Vance." Below it, the current balance line said $0,000. The transaction history showed a wire transfer of $340,000 to Landmark Title and Escrow, Scottsdale, as dated 6 weeks earlier, 3 weeks after Martin died. They hadn't even waited for the estate to open probate. The federal wire had been initiated with the forged, durable power of attorney I'd been warned about. That night, I lay awake cataloging everything. The shredded evidence, the overheard phone call, the condo listing. I needed the forged document itself, the smoking gun. Penny kept a home office on the second floor, a room she locked because it contained patient files and sensitive billing records. I'd been a nurse for 3 decades. I knew exactly where clinical records lived, and it was not in a residential filing cabinet. That lock was a standard Schlage tubular cylinder, the kind I grew up picking with my father on Saturday mornings in his locksmith shop in Parma. My dad, Henry, believed every woman should know how to open a door without a key, because you never knew when an abuser or a slumlord would change the locks on you. By the time I was 12, I could rake a 5-pin tumbler in under 90 seconds, and by 16 I could impression a key from a blank and a file. The skill had gone dormant during my nursing career, but the muscle memory never leaves. Like intubating a difficult airway, your fingers remember the anatomy. I waited for a Tuesday morning when Brett had a golf outing with his sales team, and Penny was at her clinic for a full day of Botox injections and laser peels. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator's compressor cycle on and off. I took a small tension wrench I'd bent from a hairpin and a snake pick I'd fashioned from a metal cuticle pusher, and I knelt in that quiet upstairs hallway, the only sound the hum of the central air. I inserted the tension wrench, applied gentle torque, and raked the pins. The first click came at about a minute in, a tiny sound like a fingertip tapping glass. The second at 2 minutes, and the lock surrendered with a satisfying thunk right at the 4-minute mark. My hands were steady as they'd ever been in an oar. Inside the filing cabinet, I found a hanging folder labeled Vance Estate, POA, and Transfer Documents. The durable power of attorney was on top, a 3-page document with my supposed signature at the bottom, notarized by a woman named Cynthia Westerby, commission number 034-7-2. That number was wrong. A legitimate Ohio notary number always ends with the 2-digit year of commission expiration. This one was missing the suffix. I held the page up to the light and saw the pen pressure was uneven, the ink slightly darker in spots where someone had traced over a practice stroke. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one, the kind a forensic document examiner could expose with a standard video spectral comparator in about 10 minutes. I photographed every page with my phone, using the macro focus to capture the paper texture, the notary stamp impression, the routing numbers of the financial institutions listed. Then I kept digging. Behind the POA was the purchase agreement for the condo, a 2-bedroom in Sonoran Estates with the no permanent residence over 55 clause highlighted in yellow. The buyers were Brett and Penelope Harlow, with a down payment of $340,000 sourced from personal investment liquidation. Below that was a folder of credit card statements, all in my name, opened within the last 2 months, with balances totaling $22,000, all forwarded to a P.O. box in Chicago I'd never seen. They were building a paper trail to drown me in debt after they'd liquidated the assets. I copied everything, and then I did something my nursing training taught me. I took a sterile scalpel from my medical kit and carefully excised a tiny corner of the forged POA, no bigger than a fingernail clipping, from the second page where the ink showed clear signs of digital tracing. I wanted a physical sample of the paper fiber and the ink for later forensic matching, a piece of evidence they couldn't delete from a cloud server. I relocked the cabinet, wiped the surfaces I'd touched with an alcohol swab, and went back downstairs. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. In the OR, we have a saying, the only way out is through. The Ally phase started the next day, when I took a Metra train downtown to the First Midwest Trust headquarters on La Salle Street. I dressed in my best, forgetful older woman costume, a cardigan with a loose button, sensible shoes, a scarf with a coffee stain. I didn't call ahead. I walked into the lobby and asked the receptionist if I could speak to someone about my late husband's IRA. After 20 minutes, I was ushered into a glass-walled cubicle occupied by a man in his late 40s with a close-shaved head and eyes that had the flat, careful attention of a former cop. His nameplate said Carl Decker, Compliance Officer, Elder Fraud Division. I sat down and laid the reconstructed IRA statement, the photo of the forged POA, and the corner sample of the paper on his desk. I said, "My daughter and son-in-law have forged a power of attorney and drained my retirement account. I have evidence. I need to know if this transfer can be stopped." Carl looked at the pieces for a long moment, then he turned to his computer and started typing rapidly. His expression shifted from neutral to deeply interested. He pulled up the internal transaction log and leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, the wire transfer was initiated 6 weeks ago for $340,000, but it hasn't fully settled. When your late husband first set up this IRA, the beneficiary designation included a dual-control verification rider he added by phone 2 months before his death, after we noticed unusual login attempts from an IP address in Chicago. The rider states that any transfer exceeding $10,000 requires a physical confirmation letter mailed to your residential address in Cleveland, plus a mandatory 14-day waiting period for fraud review. The letter was generated and mailed, but it appears to have been intercepted. However, the waiting period triggered an automatic internal flag that froze the funds in a suspense account pending additional beneficiary verification. The money is in limbo. It's retrievable, but only if the victim, you, can provide incontrovertible proof of forgery and agree to cooperate with a federal investigation. I stared at him. Martin had seen this coming months before his death, and he'd quietly built a dead man's switch out of bank protocols and a simple phone call. I almost wept right there in that glass cubicle, but I swallowed it. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Carl leaned back. Textbook elder financial exploitation with a cross-state real estate component. The CFPB Elder Fraud Strike Force will be very interested. But we need to move carefully. If your daughter catches wind that we're reviewing the flag, she could attempt to withdraw the transfer routing or scramble the assets. I need you to gather one more piece. Do you have access to her personal computer? I told him I could get it. He handed me a small device that looked like a standard USB flash drive, but was actually a forensic keylogger with an embedded data extraction tool. Plug this into any USB port on her laptop for at least 10 minutes. It'll pull the metadata from the forged document, the login histories for the bank account, the IP geolocation of the notary appointment, everything we need to tie the whole scheme together without giving them time to delete files. He also gave me a burner phone programmed with his direct line and the number of an agent at the CFPB named Diane Morrow, who specialized in medical professional fraud cases. The State Medical Board takes financial crimes very seriously, he said, especially when it involves vulnerable adults and forged legal documents. If we can prove her direct involvement in the forgery, her license is forfeit. The maximum cruelty beat happened sooner than I planned, and it was both deliberate and devastating. The following Saturday, I was in the kitchen making tea. I deliberately left a small puddle of water on the tile floor near the refrigerator, about the size of a dinner plate. I knew the physics from years of patient fall risk assessments, the exact coefficient of friction of polished porcelain on wet grout. I walked across it, let my feet slide out from under me, and landed hard on my left hip, the impact jolting through my pelvis. I clutched my chest and started gasping, deliberately replicating the presentation of an acute myocardial infarction. The left arm numbness, the pale, diaphoretic skin, the irregular, gasping breaths. I even forced a cold sweat by thinking about Martin lying on the drafting table. Penny was standing on the other side of the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, and she looked up. She saw me on the floor, one hand scrabbling at the cabinet, and her eyes flicked not to my face, not to the phone to call 911, but to the staircase leading up to her office. Then she said, "Mom, where is the key to the safe deposit box? The one at First Midwest. You told me you'd give it to me for the insurance documents. Where is it?" She literally stepped over me. Her Ugg slipper brushed my shoulder as she walked past my gasping body to the junk drawer next to the sink, the one where I kept random rubber bands and spare Allen wrenches. She rooted through it, her breathing quick with annoyance, not panic. I stopped gasping. I just lay there, watching my daughter rummage through a drawer while I was supposedly dying on her floor. After about 30 seconds, she realized I'd gone quiet, and she turned around. "Mom." "Okay. Not are you having a heart attack, not let me call an ambulance, just a flat inquiry into whether the obstacle in her pathway was still functioning." I sat up slowly and I said, "I'm fine, just lost my balance, the floors are slick." She didn't look relieved, she looked irritated that the distraction had cost her time. She said, "We really need to find that key, Mom, it's important." Then she walked back to her phone. That moment crystallized everything. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was a vehicle title she was trying to transfer, and the last trace of family loyalty in my heart evaporated like alcohol on a hot light. 3 days later, I plugged the forensic USB into Penny's laptop. I'd watched her unlock it enough times to know the password was her medical school graduation year, a classic narcissist's choice. She left it open on the kitchen island while she took a phone call from a patient about a post-laser redness concern, and I simply inserted the drive into the side port while pretending to wipe down the counter with a disinfectant wipe. The activity light blinked for 11 minutes, silently copying email archives, document metadata, and browser histories, including the original Photoshop file where she'd lifted my signature from a scan of an old birthday card and digitally traced it onto a blank POA template. I removed the drive before she came back and placed it in the padded envelope Carl had given me. I mailed it from a random USP's blue box 3 neighborhoods away, wearing a hat and sunglasses, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. That evening, Carl texted the burner phone a single word. "Received." The confrontation arrived exactly 2 weeks later, after the bank had placed a formal administrative hold on all the related accounts, citing a pending elder fraud investigation. Brett got the notice first, a certified letter he opened in the living room while I sat pretending to knit a scarf I'd never finish. His face went white, and he disappeared into Penny's office for an hour. That night, Penny came into my basement room with a folder and a notary she'd clearly paid to come to the house, a young woman with a clip-on badge and nervous, darting eyes. Brett stood behind her, arms crossed, his cologne thick and suffocating. Penny's voice was strained but still trying for sweetness, the way a parent coaxes a child into a vaccination. "Mom, we need you to sign these documents right now. It's just formalities for probate, but we're up against a deadline. If you don't sign, the court could put a lien on Dad's house. You don't want to lose the house Dad built with his own hands, do you? Just sign the POA and the signature cards for the checking accounts. It's nothing, I promise." She actually held out a pen, the same kind of promotional click pen Martin used to get from lumber yards. I looked at the notary, then at Penny, then at Brett. I said the line I'd practiced silently 100 times in that stuffy basement room. "You already took everything, Penny. The era, the condo, the credit cards you opened in my name, but you never took my signature. That one's always been mine, and I'm not giving it to you. Not tonight. Not ever." Penny's face cracked open. The mask of concern shattered into raw, ugly fury. She grabbed my wrist hard, her manicured nails digging into the skin, and tried to physically force the pen into my fingers. Brett stepped forward and said, "Just sign the damn papers, Elaine, stop being dramatic." I pressed the speed dial on the burner phone, which I'd already set to conference in Carl and the CFPB agent. A loud ringtone blasted into the room, and Carl's voice came over the speaker. "Mrs. Vance, we're at the door. Open up or we're coming in." Penny's head whipped around. The notary dropped her stamp and bolted for the back stairs, but the front door had already been breached, the heavy thud of a ballistic ram splintering the deadbolt. Carl came in with 3 Chicago PD officers and a woman in a suit, Agent Diane Morrow, holding a federal warrant. Penny started screaming, high and shrill, about her rights, about her lawyers, about her mother being a delusional old woman with early dementia. I stood up, straightened my cardigan, and handed the complete file of evidence I'd assembled, photographs, bank statements, the excised corner of the forged POA, the reconstructed shreds, the USB extraction log, to Agent Morrow. I said, "I believe you'll find everything you need. The notary is running out the back." An officer caught the notary on the patio, a woman named Cynthia Westerby who turned out to be Brett's cousin, and a disbarred paralegal with a prior forgery conviction. Penny was handcuffed in her own kitchen, still wearing her medical clogs, her face contorted with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, undiluted rage at being outmaneuvered. Brett sat on the couch with his hands zip-tied, weeping. The keylogger had pulled the original forgery file, created on Penny's laptop, the metadata showing it was produced at 10:42 p.m., the night before Martin's funeral. They'd forged my signature on a durable POA while her father's body was still in the mortuary cooler, and then used it to wire $340,000 to a title company for a condo that legally excluded me. The forensic document examiner later confirmed that my signature had been lifted from an old birthday card, the one I'd given her for her 16th birthday, and digitally traced onto the POA using a pressure-sensitive stylus, a classic cut and paste forgery detectable only through microscopic pixel analysis of the ink flow. The notary stamp was counterfeit, purchased from an online vendor for $40. The aftermath was swift and, in its own way, satisfying. Penny was charged with 7 counts of felony elder financial abuse, forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. The state medical board suspended her license pending the outcome, and when the forensic evidence hit the news, complete with the detail about her stepping over my collapsed body, the board voted unanimously to revoke it permanently, citing moral turpitude. She was convicted after a 6-day trial where the prosecutor projected the Photoshop layers onto a screen for the jury, showing how she'd imported my signature and adjusted the opacity to match the paper stock. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The sentence was 4 years in state prison, restitution of $340,000 to the IRA, plus punitive damages that brought the total judgment to $410,000 and change. Brett took a plea deal, 18 months probation and forfeiture of all assets related to the scheme. His career in medical sales effectively over after his name appeared in the FBI elder fraud database. Cynthia Westerby testified against them in exchange for immunity and turned over a paper trail showing the plot had started months before Martin's death, including intercepted mail, a hidden surveillance camera they'd placed in our living room to monitor when we left the house, and a planned, accidental overdose of my heart medication that they'd discussed in text messages, now in the hands of the prosecution. That last one, the overdose conversation, put Penny in a category that eliminated any possibility of parole for the first 3 years. The condo in Scottsdale, the one with the no seniors clause, was seized under a constructive trust ruling and transferred to my ownership. The court voided the age restriction as applied to the victim of the original theft, and I moved in 6 months after the sentencing. The complex is full of young professionals, tech workers, fitness instructors, people half my age. I turned the second bedroom into a rental, charging nursing students from the local community college $800 a month, well below market, with a mandatory lesson in financial literacy built into the lease. On move-in day, I hand each tenant a copy of my syllabi and a binder titled The Anatomy of a Scam, which starts with the basics of joint accounts and ends with the forensic detection of forged notary stamps. The course I teach at that same community college is called Financial Defibrillation, Recognizing and Recovering from Fiscal Predation. 12 weeks, 1 evening a week. On the first page of the syllabus, right under the course description, I include a cropped, black and white version of Penny's booking photo. Her eyes look hollow, her mouth a tight line, and I use it to illustrate the psychology of familial entitlement, the way a child can convince herself that her parents' money is already hers, that the waiting is just an inconvenience. Every semester, a student gasps and then takes furious notes. Martin's note is framed on my nightstand. The quiet architect, the man who drew contingency plans for everything, had seen the storm coming and built me a shelter out of words on the last page of a book he loved. I miss him every day, but I don't miss the version of myself that believed sacrifice was synonymous with love. I've learned that trust is not a birthright, it's a contract, and contracts require signatures that are real, witnesses who are present, and boundaries that are enforceable. My new life is not what I planned, but it's mine, legally, morally, and physically. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe, because financial predators often wear the faces of the people who say they love you, and the only cure is a community that values documentation, verification, and the courage to call the police on your own daughter. Keep your retirement accounts locked down and your power of attorney under glass. I'll see you in the next one. Stay vigilant.